So, good morning, everybody. No? See, good morning. Good morning. First of all, I have an announcement to make. At 10:05, perhaps, it's going to be an alarm because there is a national earthquake drill. Yes, so don't be scared. Yes, as I said to Moshe, we organize it to make your sojourn in Jerusalem more thrilling. Yes, more exciting. Now, okay, let's start with the first lecture. Our guest is Rachel Simon. She worked many years in the University Library in Princeton. She researches the Jews in the Middle East, in North Africa, in modern times, with a special reference to Libya, women, youth, education, Zionism, and also Jewish printing and publishing and periodicals in the Islamic world. She also published a book in 1992, Change Within Tradition Among Jewish Women in Libya, published by Seattle University of Washington Press. And today, I haven't the title. Can I see it? Yeah, she's going to talk about Libyan Jewish women's law from homeschooling to formal education. Yes. And I give you the water. And this.
Can you hear me? I can hear myself a little louder, so apparently you can hear me. And maybe we should close it. I don't want to make any changes with this. Yeah. Okay, thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this, and hopefully following this conference, the field will be less esoteric than the past. Another thank you is for yesterday's entertainment. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but in a way it's a kind of a preview to some of the things I'm going to say later on. So when we look at Jewish women's law, it derived from the environment they lived in, which was shaped by gender norms and that were based on Jewish traditions and the surrounding Muslim society. Since Jewish women were not expected to actively participate in formal religious life, it was not deemed necessary by the communal leadership to provide them with formal Jewish education. Until the late 19th century, most women were trained at home by older female relatives how to run a Jewish home. Formal education for them became available from the 1870s through European enterprises, and from the 1930s also by the community. The lack of formal education didn't preclude women from having spiritual life, but it differed from that of men. Their spirituality was manifested first and foremost orally in female poetry, and as well as in material culture. This paper will examine what was the impact of growing educational, social, and economic opportunities for Jewish women, mainly in the urban society, on Libyan Jewish women's law from the late 19th century under Ottoman, Italian, and British rules until the mass Jewish immigration from Libya starting in the late 1940s. So I'll dwell a little on Jewish education as well. In order to actively participate in the synagogue service and lead the community, Jewish men had to be able to read Hebrew and Aramaic texts of the Bible, Torah, and prayer books. Boys' formal education was provided mainly by the community and enabled them to read text in the Hebrew alphabet. But since the spoken language was primarily Judeo-Arabic, boys and men didn't understand what they usually didn't understand what they read. This kind of education was the basic one for the majority of the men and for most of the period. Only few continued in more advanced Jewish studies in preparation to become religious functionaries. Thus, although men acquired an important tool for intellectual growth, most were in fact functionally illiterate because they didn't understand what the text they recited or listened to meant. Consequently, only few men could contribute to Jewish studies. Women's role in life was different from that of the men. They were in charge of running a Jewish home and had no formal religious or leadership responsibilities. Consequently, they were educated differently than boys. Like the boys, girls understood only Judeo-Arabic, but they usually were not taught to read the Hebrew alphabet because they didn't have to actively participate in the religious services which required reading. Instead, theirs was an experience-based education provided at home by their mothers and older female relatives how to run a Jewish home. Thus, although women couldn't read the laws and regulations which they had to follow, they knew how to execute them properly. While most girls were home trained in this manner, some also received some formal education either by fathers or some other means, but basically that's what they studied. But just as was the case for the boys, this formal education didn't enable them for much of a spiritual growth. A major change in Jewish girls' educational opportunities in Libya took place from the 1870s, when formal girls' education became available through European enterprises. First Italian, starting in 1877, followed by French by the Alliance Israélite Universelle from 1896. In both cases, this follows the establishment of boys' schools in Tripoli. The Italian boys' school was founded at the initiative of local Jews who wanted to prepare their sons to join them in their commercial enterprises with Italy and be equipped for social interactions with the Europeans. It soon became apparent for the parents that in order to improve the social and economic ties of Libyan Jewish men with Italy, a similar institution for girls was required. Similar feelings prompted the opening of the Alliance School for Girls. The main focus of both networks was on Italian and French language and subjects, based on curricula common in Italy and France, complemented with some Jewish topics, including Hebrew language, as well as some vocational training. Following the 1911 Italian occupation of Libya, the official state educational network in which Jews participated was Italian. Consequently, until the community provided female education, most Jewish girls who attended school received the Italian education. Community-based formal education for women starting in the 1930s at the initiatives of young local Jewish, of course, Jewish Zionist men who founded the Ben Yehuda Society for the spread of the Hebrew language. These men wanted to make Hebrew the primary language of the community. They founded first afternoon and evening classes for boys and men in Tripoli, but relatively soon they felt the need to include women in this program, believing that the role of women as initial primary educators of the new generation is imperative for the transformation of the community to a Hebrew-speaking one. This prompted the establishment of classes for women in 1931. These classes witnessed a growing number of students, even female students, even outnumbering that of boys who had other options to learn Hebrew. Thus, contrary to boys, many of whom learned Hebrew in the traditional manner, girls studied Hebrew only in a modern way, which aimed to enable them to comprehend, speak, and write modern Hebrew. Girls were at first taught by men, but pretty soon women graduates of these classes acquired teaching experience and started teaching women. Thus, women studied subjects which had been traditionally exclusive for men and even advanced to a prestigious profession, teaching. I don't know how prestigious it is now, but it's a different story, which had been reserved for men. Jewish education suffered during the Second World War due to the Italian anti-Semitic racial legislation, which prevented Jews from attending state school. Huge change followed the British military occupation of Libya in 1942-43. Not only were the state schools once again open to Jews and the traditional Jewish schools reopened, but the character of Jewish education was gradually transformed due to the initiative of Jewish Palestinian soldiers in the British Army, thus bringing about the formalization of communal education for women. Starting in Benghazi, which the British Army conquered first, the Jewish soldiers established a Hebrew school in Benghazi with a curriculum based on the one common in Palestine. Later on, Hebrew schools opened also in Tripoli and the countryside, but were more common in the urban than the rural society. Some schools were opened by local initiatives and without outside teachers, although they often asked for and received teaching materials from Palestine. Several local teachers were involved in this enterprise from the beginning, mostly instructors and graduates of the Ben Yehuda Society. The soldiers felt the need to train local teachers to replace them in the event of troop movements to Europe and due to the growing opposition of the British commanders. Consequently, the soldiers provided some teaching training for men and women, and later on in the 1950s, when representatives of Israel were officially in Libya, they also conducted some teacher training for both men and women. Contrary to boys who received both traditional and modern formal education, the girls' formal education was completely modern. Jewish female education in Libya, though, was restricted to the elementary level, usually lasting no more than 4 years, as was the case in the AIU School as well in Tripoli. There was no opportunity for post-primary education, which the Italian school offered after the Italian occupation. The Alliance continued to operate under Italian rule, but since the official state language was Italian and the common language at home was still mainly Judeo-Arabic, the cultural impact of this Alliance school was secondary. Consequently, although several hundred Jewish girls acquired the basics of French culture, it couldn't become a major foundation for their spiritual life. The education provided by the Italian and Alliance schools was immersed in Italian and French culture, thus geared towards different goals than those of the community. While the communal Jewish Hebrew education for women was embraced enthusiastically and was quite successful, it lasted for a short period of time before the mass immigration to Israel. Consequently, the majority of Libyan Jewish women were still shaped spiritually by their traditional home-based education, and most of their spirituality continued to be oral and Judeo-Arabic. Now I come to the main topic of the presentation. Libyan Jewish women's spirituality was manifested first and foremost in female and poetry. It dealt with wide range of subjects, from daily and life cycle events, work, specific women's issues, Torah, saints, Jewish festivals. It was sung by women of all ages in their leisure gathering, at family feasts, during individual and communal work at home and in the fields, and in the synagogue, and some other places. Many songs had a known structure and text, but they were also flexible, and individuals could introduce personal contributions, at times even criticizing the treatment of women. Some women were renowned for their singing and contributions, as well as leading group singing. Still, this was not based on formal learning, status, or age, but on individual capacity, and theoretically, any woman could fulfill this role, since all women grew up in this spiritual and supporting environment. Due to the prevailing gender norms, women were restricted to their home, but the definition of home was much wider in the rural areas than in the urban society, and I cannot develop this topic here right now. Thus, rural women, Jewish women, had more opportunities to encounter Muslim women and be influenced by their behavior than urban women. This had some impact upon female poetry and singing in both directions, because women heard each other's songs. A major category of female poetry related to life cycle events, from birth through wedding to death. And for example, when a son was born, female relatives used to gather around the mother's side for a week and sing and try to kind of be a little kind of taking some time, and also prior to circumcision ceremony, other women were singing special songs while preparing for the ceremony. The most celebrated event in person's life was one's wedding, and female singing was an important part of the celebration. I don't want to elaborate all the events that before and after, but just to, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that women could at times kind of add their opinion on special events. There is in one of the memoirs about one of the towns in Libya, it's said that we could see that sometimes, sorry, women expressed some criticism. Thus, in 1916, during there was the kind of rebellion of the local Tripolitanians against Italian rule, and went back and forth again, something I cannot elaborate right now. There was an 18-year-old orphaned woman who was forced to marry a wealthy 70-year-old man, and who was cut off from his first wife because of the war situation. And the women sang, "By the table, my father and my stepfather sold me and married me to an old man of his own age." This story is, again, it's not really related to the topic, but when the Italians reconquered the area, they took this man, he disappeared, and she was a guna for about 60, 70 years. So they definitely didn't, they had some kind of criticism of the event in the first place. Upon the death of a person, special mourning, women were mourning, and they had special songs for it, for both men and women, usually for Jews, but again, sometimes they also had some of these of the songs for non-Jews. And in 1920, when one of the rebel leaders who was kind of helpful for the Jews was murdered by a rival tribe, they composed a mourning song praising him and condemning the murderers. There are songs of places of worship. For example, they used to gather on the, women gather before the Shabbat and clean the floors, and had special songs for it. They had songs in praise of pious men, or maybe men, Jewish men who weren't considered such pious or saintly. For example, Shabtai Tzvi. There was a candle in honor of him in one of the synagogues in Tripoli, which women used to clean and pray for. The rabbis didn't like it. They tried to break the candle and change the words of the song, but the women nonetheless continued. All of it obviously in Judeo-Arabic. Daily life was also source of songs of work. For example, when the women were grinding flour in the morning, they used to sing in solitude. When groups of women in the villages used to go out of the village once a week, usually to chop wood and go farther away and then carry all of it back, they had special songs to cheer them up and kind of ease the burden. Some handicrafts were also kind of, they could express themselves, for example, obviously in cooking, but there was, for Shavuot, there was a special treat that some kind of bagels in various shapes, and they used to bake them and then hung them on a string for the children. Again, there was a traditional shapes, but they could improvise on them. As I've said, it was open to everyone, and everyone could participate in it. Once formal education started, this, as I've said, it wasn't long in period. It was not long in the years that they studied, and much of it was not much connected to their traditional life. So the formal education didn't add much to their spiritual growth. But there were a few things that one could add to it, that the formal education did bring some changes. For example, some of the Hebrew schools and Hebrew youth periodicals encourage children to write poems. And some girls participated as well, and there is a collection of poems written by children, and there is at least one written by a girl. Another thing is that schools and clubs encouraged theatrical performances, usually in Hebrew and Italian, written by men, and girls and women participated in them. And again, this was something, and it was for the whole community, sometimes also with Italians in the audience. So this is again something that wasn't common before, that previously women performed in singing only for themselves and things that they wrote by themselves. So to sum up, to sum up, the developments of women's life and lore were not unique to Libya, what I told here, but it was different according to place and circumstances. It doesn't mean either that formal education in itself is a barrier to spiritual growth and creativity. But in Libya, the dimensions for formal education was such that it slowed the transformation of local cultural environment. But the changing times also contributed to the stagnation of the traditional spiritual expressions of women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi. Welcome. So the next speaker, questions will be at the end, yes, of the session. Next speaker is Joy A. Land. She's a retired faculty member of the History Department at the University of Connecticut, Stanford, and is currently a research scholar there. Her interests center on Jewish women educators of Tunisia and the history of the modern Middle East. She's the author of many publications in the United States and abroad. And today, she's going to talk about creating cultural capital, the education of Jewish females of the Alliance Universelle, School for Girls in the city of Tunis, 1882-1914.
Thank you.
And, I'm going to
just put it up on the screen.
I'm going to sign you.
That's 5 minutes, yes. Okay, now how do I advance it?
You can start and I will go for it.
No. מה? יש לך משהו פה? It's not on the screen. It's not on the screen. Oh.
Just a second.
Oh, now it is.
Okay, so this is
How do I, if I want to go to the next one?
you can use this or you can
To
use
go
the
down?
clicker. Mhm.
And then go up is this way?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Did you lose something? A
I
pen?
left my watch here, but I don't know.
You left your watch?
I'll find it later, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Right.
Okay.
You can use this one.
Water for you.
No, she
Thank you. Oh, all right, whatever.
Okay.
Two emblematic photographs from the city of Tunis frame our discussion of Jewish women's creation of cultural capital under Islam. The first image, from 1889, portrays a bride in Ottoman Turkish-style billowy pants and blouse, while her groom wears a European suit. The young woman, Elise or Zita Slama, aged 15, was a pupil at the Alliance Israélite Universelle, AIU, or as you would know it called, Yisrael Chaverim, as a school for girls in the city of Tunis, from approximately ages 10 through 12. At Elise's home, the women spoke Judeo-Arabic, were illiterate, and dressed in the local style. But at school, the girls spoke French, read and wrote in that language, sewed European dresses, and used French first names. Elise's groom, Mordechai Smadja, who had already assumed European garb by the time of his betrothal, had secretly attended the AIU School for Boys for 2 years. With her engagement, Elise was able to leverage her limited education into improved social status. As an educator for her future children, une mère éducatrice, and as a helpmate to her husband in his work. Mordechai later became editor of the periodical La Justice, which promoted Tunisian Jewish assimilation to French culture. The photo thus represents a young woman's success in the marriage market as she married a young man with a similar education and parallel cultural aspirations. The second photo from the Sumatra family collection expresses the accumulation of cultural capital through dress. It presents Juliet Sumatra, daughter of Elise and Mordechai, in her lawyer's robes in 1919. Her education included primary school and lycée in Tunis. After 2 years of lycée and the granting of the brevet élémentaire, when all her girlfriends left school to prepare their trousseau, Juliet, rather than remaining the only female in an all-male environment, studied for her additional exams with a private tutor. Awarded the brevet supérieur, she sailed to Marseille for law studies at Aix-en-Provence under the strict supervision of her father. Upon her return to Tunis, Juliet became the first woman lawyer and therefore the first Jewish woman lawyer in Tunisia. This image testifies to her crowning achievement. Juliet's marriage at age 31 to another lawyer suggests that her creation of cultural capital through education led to higher social status in marriage and greater economic capital through potential career earnings. Although you should know that she actually never was able to practice in Tunis due to social conditions there. Both Elise and her daughter Juliet attended the AIU School in Tunis, which was part of a trans-regional network spanning the Balkans, the Ottoman Empire, and its Arab provinces, Persia, Iran, Egypt, and North Africa. The Alliance was founded in 1860, and its goals, as stated in its protocols, were the emancipation of the local Jewish population and the regeneration of its co-religionists. In Tunis, the AIU established a school for boys in 1878 and a school for girls in 1882. Open in theory to Jews and non-Jews, rich and poor, but catering in practice primarily to Jews of the lowest economic and social rank of the Jewish quarter, in classical Arabic, Harat al-Yahud. Academically, the AIU advanced the study of French language and the transmission of Enlightenment culture, along with Jewish studies. Vocationally, it promoted the learning of trades such as couture or artisanal crafts for girls. After the successful completion of a 7-year course of study, if top pupils passed the difficult exam for the Certificate of Primary School Studies, the Certificat d'études primaires, or CEP, it was duly noted. Or pupils may have received the well-regarded AIU diploma in couture. Such credentials, in the words of Pierre Bourdieu, constitute cultural capital. As Bourdieu stated in 1986, cultural capital is convertible on certain conditions into economic capital and may be institutionalized in the forms of educational qualifications. Thus, the creation of cultural capital as a certificate or diploma could allow a young woman access to employment. It could also grant a Tunisian Jewess the ability to inhabit the public sphere as a well-dressed young French woman, presumably capable of earning a living wage. This essay will seek to answer the following questions. How did an education and knowledge of French most likely enhance the marriage prospects and improve the social status of Tunisian Jewish women in the matrimonial market? How did possession of the CEP increase employment opportunities for young women in the AIU and the French educational systems of Tunisia? How did training in sewing and couture lead to economic productivity? In the late 19th century, how did Tunisian Muslim women influence the dress of their female Jewish neighbors? Finally, how did the outfits and the outlook of the young Tunisian Jewish women change as they entered modernity at the fin de siècle? Primary sources originally from the archives of the AIU in Paris in the form of photographs and text will support this study. Photos of individuals draw attention to evolving styles of headgear within the female Jewish community. Group school photos in the early 20th century depict AIU girls in traditional clothing and less than a decade later in French modern dresses, constructed in their couture classes. Texts consist of correspondence from the school principals in Tunis, both male and female, to their AIU employers in Paris, describing changing social conditions and their roles as cultural intermediaries. Acquiring knowledge of French and its link to improved marriage prospects were discussed by principals in their correspondence to Paris. A plaintive letter from the 5th directrice, or female school principal, at Tunis, Julie Cohen-Scally-Sagwez, highlights the difficulty of young women who wanted to get married but did not know French. Quote, "If you know how much we need to learn French, we cannot even find someone to get married to us. We entrust others. When we tell the matchmaker that we are ignorant of French, he does not want to deal with us. Young men only want young girls who know French. It is a comic note on a particularly poignant subject," unquote. Thus, French and even a rudimentary knowledge of the language could serve as cultural capital for aspiring brides and compel them to extend their schooling. For the Certificate in Primary School Studies, the CEP, girls were not only required to have mastered the domestic arts, but also to be able to write about these issues in French. The questions from the exam session of June 1915 were not strictly geared to creating an educated French ménagère or housewife. They took into account the culinary preferences of local North Africans, and here you can see some of the questions on home economics. If a student could provide suitable answers, the results would indicate a fairly high level of French literacy and, of course, home economics. And obviously, these are gendered questions specifically for the girls, and the boys had a different course of vocational training with different questions. High scores on such questions would provide a girl with the cultural capital of a CEP, the possibility of attending secondary school if her parents allowed it, or the opportunity to marry a similarly French-educated young man. In any case, literacy in French could provide freedom from destitution. For those girls who chose to continue their education after 2 years of study at lycée and the acquisition of the brevet élémentaire, students could return to the AIU primary school to serve as monitors or monitrices, as they say in French. In 1907, they received 50 francs per month or 600 francs per year. This worked out to approximately 1.6 francs per day. During the early years of the 20th century in Tunis, the cost of meat was 2 francs per kilo and 2.5 francs for a kilo of bread. Thus, a monitrice would have to have worked almost 2 days to afford a kilo of meat or a kilo of bread. Employment may have saved her from starvation, but her wages would have been insufficient to elevate her above a subsistence level. Alternatively, pupils with the CEP could enroll in the AIU's teacher training school in Paris, the École Normale Israélite Orientale. Upon completion of the 4-year course of study and the receipt of their brevet supérieur, students could then become teachers or principals in the AIU or the French public school systems. In both arenas, teaching salaries differed between men and women and between natives of France and those of Tunisia. By 1912, after 14 years of service for the AIU, a local male teacher or instituteur received an annual salary of 1440 francs, while a local institutrice or female teacher was paid 1220 francs. Gaining the cultural capital inherent in the brevet supérieur led to a reasonable livelihood, particularly in the case of a professional teaching couple and a joint income. As part of their daily curriculum, girls attended handicraft classes. This might remind you of the picture on your bag and on your program. Sewing skills needed for running a household or for future employment were encouraged. These included pattern cutting and sewing lingerie and dresses. More fanciful work such as tapestry making, embroidery, or crocheting was to be limited to no more than 1 hour per week. This training was similar to the education of young girls of the 19th century French bourgeoisie. After AIU students graduated from primary school, they could continue their vocational training as apprentices in workshops of the AIU schools. Workshops for boys and girls were an educational priority. Once workshops were installed in the school for girls, mothers were happy to see their daughters make their own clothes. By 1891, several girls worked in town. Those who were employed by couturiers earned almost 2 francs per day, but 2 others only earned half a franc per day making corsets. In 1909, however, when girls left the apprenticeship program, they only made 2 to 2.5 francs per day, depending on ability. The directrice, Louise Bonstein-Guérin, felt that this was a sufficient sum for the girls to gain a better life. On the other hand, when boys left the apprenticeships, they earned 3 to 6 francs per day. Boys engaged in different and more remunerative trades than girls. In addition, they were expected to spend a lifetime working in the public sphere. Girls, it was anticipated, would not. Therefore, employers often did not view females as good long-term investments, either in teaching or in the trades. This could lead to lack of advancement, particularly at the higher teaching levels, and the imposition, as we say today, of a glass ceiling on a woman's prospective income. Moreover, by 1909, the directrice had difficulty making inroads in the local market for the sale of dresses. After the establishment of a workshop for former apprentices and a switch from couture to embroidered blouses, and this is an image actually from Izmir, so I hope I'm not taking the fire away from the next speaker, but I couldn't find a similar one for Tunis. Anyway, the workshops all over the AIU system were very similar. So when they switched, the directrice found financial success in the foreign markets of Paris and London, with surpluses distributed to the girls, since the workshop was now organized as a cooperative. The directrice thus served as a commercial intermediary between her students and the fashion houses of Europe, including Liberty of London, which is still in business today, engendering economic capital in the process. During the 19th century, the dress of Tunisian Jewish women attracted the attention of foreign travelers. In 1813, Menachem Mordechai Noah, the Jewish U.S. consul to the Barbary States, which included Tunisia, noted the following about the Jewesses he encountered in the kingdom of Tunis. Quote, "They are fat and awkward, their dress consisting of a petticoat of silk of 2 colors, principally yellow and purple, around which is thrown in several folds a thin gauze wrapper. This outer covering usually enveloped Jewish women through the early and mid-19th century, but was later discarded. As we shall see, this garment reflected the influence of Arab dress on Jewish women of Tunisia. Tunisian Jewish women in traditional dress usually enveloped their hair in a headscarf. In the image we'll soon see of a woman wearing a headscarf. No dear, I think it's missing. It's missing, okay. The young woman's hair is only partially covered with a scarf, and not with the conical hat of Jewish women in the north of Tunisia. This is the conical hat, the women north of Tunisia. I'd like you to pay attention to the ribbons that are still attached to that hat. They are red and yellow. So bear that in mind. Now, returning to the image, which isn't here somehow. I don't know what happened to it. It's not here. Okay, so these are the kufiyas. The border, well, you'll have to imagine a woman in a headscarf. The border of the scarf, which outlines the exposed hair, is the focal point that defines the photo. I actually have something you can put in here for the photos. Excuse me, could you hand me my purse? And the lack of a conical hat may indicate that the young woman is from the southern part of Tunisia, probably from the Jewish community of Gabes. In that town, Jewish women revealed the front part of their hair, but covered the rest of their head with a scarf knotted at the nape of the neck. This practice of partially covering their hair signals the Jewish imitation of the style of Muslim young women, which led to hybridity of dress between Jews and Muslims. Could you put this in? This should have it. Sorry, I sent it to you, but not all of it appeared. To the European traveler of 1882, the dress of the women of the city of Tunis in the north evoked the response that it was strange and indecent. This one we have, wait. This is the strange and indecent dress that European travelers noted. One such observer noted that the Jewish women's tight-fitting trousers and stockings and their hip-length silk tunics reminded him of the costume of ballet girls. The outfit included an embroidered velvet jacket, black leather slippers or high wooden sandals, topped by the conical hat. The traditional conical, oh, here she is. Yeah, here's the woman with the headscarf, and her hair is partially exposed in front, and that's a beginning of modernity in that she's exposing her hair and should be covered. So there she is, without her. Thank you. So advancing now to the kufiya, we saw this, and here is our woman who is dressed very indecently by European standards, but looks very modern for today. If you look around the audience, people might be wearing this or something similar. Let's see, where were we? So the traditional conical embroidered hat was termed the kufiya, derived from classical Arabic kufi, or back of the head, fastened with red or yellow ribbons. The colors red and yellow reflected the minority status of non-Muslim women, upheld by the discriminatory dress regulations irregularly enforced through the mid-19th century. Although the title of the photograph is Jewish Woman of Tunisia, based on the woman's headgear, it should more accurately refer to Tunis. However, it was the director of the School for Boys in Tunis, David Kazes, a native of Morocco, who countered the heterosexual male European gaze and its assumption of indecency. In a letter to the AIU from 1884, Kazes noted that the dress of Jewish and Muslim women was actually the same, but since Jewish women no longer submitted to the practice of seclusion, nor did they continue to wear a hayik or a cloak, which covered everything, Jewish women's dress appeared indecent. Thus, the Jewish woman had not only discarded the traditional lengths of fabric which had draped her body, but a tunic and tights replaced the petticoats of an earlier era. Although the woman's outfit appears in the photo to be traditional, the lack of a hayik indicates that she's on the road to modernity. In addition, by observing that Jewish and Arab Muslim women wore the same apparel at home, the school director indicates the acculturation of Jewish women to Tunisian Muslim culture. I'll just go follow the photos. Here we have a photo of schoolgirls from about 1903. You'll note they're wearing the conical hats. The girl standing to the left, who is really the focal point of the image, is wearing that hayik, which is covering her body. It's in yellow. Next, we have a picture of a native Tunisian family called the Twansa, and you will note a variety of dress styles. First, we see the father and the youngest daughter are wearing traditional Ottoman-style Turkish clothes, as is the mother. The mother's wearing billowy white pants. But then we look at the oldest daughter, a little girl, and what is she wearing? She's wearing a dress. Therefore, she will probably be the catalyst for change in the family, and she is most likely attending the school for girls in Tunis, but she would not be doing that unless her father had also been modernizing, and he is wearing the fez of the Tanzimat, or the Ottoman reforms. So we can discuss this at another time. So this is a family photograph. We notice the furnishings are typically rugs hung on the wall, and they don't have European furnishings yet. The next photo from less than 10 years later, is of schoolgirls in 1911. They make their own outfits in school. They are wearing collars that they made individually, and there's a certain amount of creativity. You can see that there. I'd like to return to the map over here with which we started. This is, of course, the system, and you will see again that within the family unit, with one household, there could be a blend of identities and a blend of garb, a blend of both, let's say, Ottoman-style clothing and European-style clothing, indicating that there was no direct line to modernity or to progress or to change. It evolved slowly in various times and places. And so this gives us that image. And then the last photo we have here is of our friend Juliet, the lawyer, who represents the culmination of an AIU education and receiving and reaching the goals of regeneration as Jewish women under Islam gain cultural capital. Thank you very much. Okay, please unplug me. Yeah, thanks. Very good.
It's a difficult task to shorten such an interesting lecture. I was thinking about Bourdieu, that was probably very happy that to go back to North Africa to talk about his matters. The next speaker is Efrat Aviv. Efrat Aviv is a lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at Bar-Ilan University. She's the author of a book titled Anti-Semitism and Anti-Zionism in Turkey, which came out this year with Routledge. She's a fellow at the BESA, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and was a fellow of the Vidal Sassoon International Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism between 2011 and 2015. Today, she's going to talk about, about the fact that it's very hard to be a Jew, but it's even harder being a Jewish woman. Jewish women's identity in the community of Izmir on the eve of the Young Turks Revolution, 1899-1980.
Right.
Well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a second, please. Okay. Is it working? Okay, thank you. Okay. 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 So good morning, everybody. Like you've heard, I've called my lecture, It's Very Hard Being a Jew, but it's even harder being a Jewish woman. We can discover how men saw women by quoting some folk sayings taken from the Jewish Sephardic society. Let's see a few examples. לא, יש כאן איזה בעיה, אבל זה לא זז. אני מנסה, אני לא יודעת, יש כאן איזושהי בעיה. לא יודעת. תראה, תקלו פה. טוב, אין מה לעשות. זה לא הזמן עכשיו לדבר על זה.
In the meantime, we survived the earthquake.
תעלי את זה קצת, כי לא שומעים אותך, אפרת.
אוקיי.
בסדר, עם זה וזה.
אוקיי, תודה. So, let's see a few examples as said. Ni novia sin velo, ni mujer sin celo. It means there's no bride without a veil and a woman without envy. La mujer y el vino quitan al hombre del tino. A woman and wine drive a man crazy. Or de la mujer y del vicino nada no queda cuadrado. You can't hide anything from the neighbor or the woman. And also la mujer y la gallina por mucho andar son pedridas. Woman and chicken both get lost from so much wandering. The westernization and modernization of the Ottoman Empire that increased in intensity from the end of 18th century and onwards had a profound impact on Ottoman Jewry. From the mid-19th century, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, an organization whose objective was to educate the West in Western ways and to instill openness to progress and new cultures all over the Sephardic and Eastern world, began its activities among the Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire. The Alliance established a network of modern schools which played a significant role in the westernization and modernization processes of the local communities. The overthrow of Abdul Hamid II's autocratic regime in 1908 by the Young Turks started the second constitutional period from 1908 to the beginning of World War I. This period was witness to intensive social and ideological agitation, which, among other things, accelerated the growth of women's associations, opened university to women, and incorporated women in the workforce. More importantly, discussions on women and family were produced by writers with a Muslim, Western, and Turkish orientation. Yet, modernization is tested first and foremost in the family relationship. This was the beginning of a multi-level cultural transformation for the Jewish communities all over the empire. This transformation was similar to the Enlightenment movement within the European Jewish communities in that it transformed the traditional cultural patterns and opened the formerly closed community to new ideologies and experiences. This transformation manifested itself, among other areas, in feminism. It appears that progress and modernizations were more profound in Izmir than in other regions. In fact, during the 19th century, starting from the 17th century, Izmir became an important metropolis as well as one of the most renowned cultural and commercial centers in the Ottoman Empire. Izmir's flourishing in the cultural as well as financial spheres attracted many Jews as well as other minorities such as Greeks, Armenians, and Turks, of course. Therefore, I've chosen Izmir to be a case study for the rest of the communities in the Ottoman Empire. Unlike the surrounding society, the role Sephardic Jewish women played in the process of feminism had no national motive. They didn't take part in forming national identity, as feminism was perceived in Mediterranean countries in the 18th century and on especially the Balkans. Despite the differences, there are parallel lines between the struggle of Jewish women and that of the women in the surrounding society in the context of nationalism, especially in perceiving the woman as an educator, since in these two groups, the woman was perceived as a mother educator. This means someone who is cultured, someone who is supposed to break the magic circle of the East corrupt principles which brought about degenerative societies and which was passed on from generation to generation. As a result, the reason for educating women was in the end to make them good mothers for the benefit of the nation. The event that pushed or even began the cultural feminism of the Jewish community was opening schools for girls. In 1878, the Alliance founded the first girls' school in Izmir. In 1884, the school opened a professional workshop and 35 students were educated in this framework so that they could find themselves a profession. In 1900, the school comprised 300 students, and in 1895, there were two girls' schools in Izmir comprising 500 students. The idea of giving a modern education as part of a new cultural process is well expressed in El Comercial. El Comercial was the journal of the cultural elite of Izmir, and it expressed progressive notions where they were given maximum expression. I'll give one example. Under the title Respectemos la mujer, respecting the woman, it's one of the articles that were written by a male actually, that used the pseudonym El Feminista. Now in Spanish we know that El refers to male gender, so we know that it was written by a male, by a man. And El Comercial, as it was one of the Ladino journals which allocated much space to expressing feminist ideas, probably due to it being, as said, the newspaper of the elite, which already supported ideas regarding women's status. Let's see this article. I'm quoting. The woman guards the family's future and the next generations. What is the woman's function? Is it not a noble and holy mission to well raise the family? Is not the future of humanity in her hands? She is the one who needs to educate the children well. She is the one who needs to make them loyal, humane citizens, men in the full meaning of the word. We made sure that the mother, once she has become a mother, that the woman, once she has become a mother, will have the attributes and understandings needed for the task she is destined to fulfill. These words, coming from a man, express feminist ideas in their first stage. Okay. Okay, in first stages, the woman needs to free herself from her former status, and she needs to be educated as part of the process of cultural feminism. But her task in its basis is kept the same, to be a good mother and a successful wife. Her mission would be more successfully fulfilled if only she would get a modern education. On the other hand, whatever the purpose of giving modern education was, education is what brought Jewish women out of their houses and into the working environment. With the establishment of Alliance throughout the empire, students who excelled were sent to teacher seminary in Paris with the expectation of bringing them back as teacher later on to their native countries. Countries, as I said. From 1972, women were also included in this teaching force. Though it was difficult to send girls from Ottoman Empire to Paris alone, many parents agreed to it, knowing that the teacher's position would secure economic welfare and even prestige for their daughter. In this period, teaching was the only position that led Jewish women to an independent life. These women were a new role model among Jewish women in the empire, of course, upon their return. There were modern women who had attained education, had learned new languages, and had lived in Paris, the city of progress and culture. These women could more easily present themselves as equal to men in the Jewish society, again, upon their return. Despite this, during the 4 years of studies in the teacher seminary in Paris, the Sephardic and Eastern girls felt inferior to the boys, like we heard before today. The inferiority for the girls was twofold. First, they suffered for being Eastern, and they had the honor of being called names on the account of their origin and culture. Second, the boys' learning conditions were much better than the girls, not only in the curriculum, its content, and the number of weekly teaching hours, but also in their aims. The boys got 10 to 12 hours a week of French, while the girls received only 8 hours a week. Other than that, besides sewing lessons, which were taught for 7 to 10 hours a week, the girls did not study any subject for more than 5 hours a week. In any case, the fact that girls took part in the Alliance teaching force is probably the first experience in the Jewish history of Sephardic Jewry to bring about a real and active change in women's status by women themselves already in the latter third of the 19th century. Another shared issue between the two groups of women, the Jewish and the non-Jewish, is women's contribution to journalism. Indeed, we did not find a women's-only newspaper in the Izmir community, unlike the surrounding society, because in Turkey, for example, already by the end of the 19th century, they had journals written by women and for women. Some of them were even distributed in the Russian Empire within the Muslim communities in the Russian Empire. And it was like they had all kind of tips for cosmetics or how to treat your skin, how to treat your hair, like Leisha in Ottoman Turkish, something like that. So it didn't happen within the Jewish Turkish society. Again, the women of Izmir did not take an active part in general written journalism, but we can find some writers, for example, a writer called Gold Lucy, who brought to print common proverbs regarding women, which were in use in the society in which she lived. She brings, for example, the sentence, "Quien mujer tiene, pelea tiene." Whoever has a woman has a fight. Even the participation of women in journalistic writing alone, though shows some progress. A very interesting phenomenon can be found in the Izmir community, the same society in which the religious influence, and I remind you of Rabbi Achem Palaji, influence was stronger than any other community across the empire. It shows very progressive feminist ideas. Journalism was where those subversive ideas were mostly expressed. In another article, which deals with letting girls participate in the theater, we discover more radical feminism than the one we met up to now. Just before that, I'd like to again to stress that all theater groups in Izmir had to struggle with obstacles, with various obstacles coming especially from the rabbinical and religious institutions. But the female actors face additional obstacles since their mere presence on stage outraged the Orthodox citizens much more than male actors. Even after the Jewish communities had become less traditional and plays would even take place on Shabbat, the female actors' names would still be mentioned in the program by their initials only. On the other hand, there were also authors who pushed for more intensive collaboration of women in theater, and I'm quoting, "Why won't fathers permit their daughters to take part in a play benefiting the needy? It is a necessity for the girls to come in some contact with male actors. We cannot fathom a girl speaking or being in the same room with a boy for a long while. We always blame the girls," and in parentheses he asks why with 3 question marks. "Well, we can't think of anything to say to the boy. We believe that girl's honor can survive only when she does not see or speak to boys. And that is also why a marriage of love is quite rare in our community. It is time we allow our daughters more freedom. Objectively," he says, "I feel I should add that it is time we understood that a female actor is nothing to be shocked about. The Christians and Greeks allow the girls to appear on stage, and so should we. Not because they do that, but because it is noble and absolutely not demeaning." The writer here calls upon the readers not to look at the actresses performing in a play as cheap, and cheap is a term that he uses, not me. On the contrary, he claims that theater, a relatively new phenomenon in the Jewish society, was a cultural institution, and that more girls should perform in this theater, even if it would mean not keeping strict physical distance between boys and girls. The writer states that the moral religious inhibitions are a primitive issue, and that today it's accepted for women to take part in plays just as men do. Not only does this columnist call for dismantling the boundaries between boys and girls and for a gender-equal society, he also denigrates what was until then an unbreakable rule. And as if it was not enough, he also indirectly preaches in favor of adopting the new social order prevalent in modern world and in direct contradiction to Orthodox Jewish traditions. If folk sayings represent the views of the general public, the world and social point of view, then the feminism emanating from the folk sayings, which were common in the Jewish Sephardic society in the Ottoman Empire, seems a bit different. From the proverbs I quoted in the beginning of my presentation, we can perceive a negative attitude towards women. On the other hand, there are some folk sayings which praise the woman. For example, todo depende de la mujer. Everything depends on the woman. Or el que a la mujer siente nunca se arrepiente. He who listens to his wife's advice will never regret it. Also, the mujer buena tiene su reinado detrás de su puerta. A good woman beyond her door, in the sense of a woman's beauty is inward. Or madre yugosa quita hijas nicocheras, a diligent mother nurtures daughters to be housewives. So the first group of folk things help perpetuate a woman's stigma, according to which a woman babbles, is curious, envious, and narrow-minded. On the other hand, the second group praises women, but even here, women are positive only in the familial context. This is if she's diligent and raises the next generation of housewives, then she wins loads and praise. When she dares exceed her domestic boundaries, she's considered a dangerous woman who doesn't fulfill her primal destiny to fulfill her husband's wishes and to watch over the house. Some sages of this period saw women in precisely this way. In the book of laws and sermons of Rabbi Yosef Palagi, actually lived a little bit before the discussed period. It was the son of the famous rabbi that I mentioned, Chaim Palagi. He wrote in his book, Joseph and His Brothers, the following. After he praised her deeds and her way of speaking, that is not like other chattering women to speak non-important things, but her mouth she opened in wisdom and Torah. With wisdom and Torah are the laws relating to, which are the laws relating to women. From here and other examples that I'll skip, we learn that usually a woman blabbers and deals with nonsensical matters, and only a woman who is defined as a woman of valor is unique, since she speaks words of holiness and charity. Rabbi Palagi as well, while interpreting the deed of Jael and the murder of Sisera, notes that a woman is fit only if she fulfills her husband's wishes, and I'm quoting, there is no fit woman but a woman who fulfills her husband's wishes. In an attempt to settle the contradiction according to which the woman in Izmir was treated with positive, progressive, and even a feminist attitude, while she was stuck with uncomplimentary labels, it could be said that feministic ideas existed in the Izmir communities as they were expressed mostly through journalism. But these ideas, at least in the chronological aspect of my presentation, were the purview of the upper middle class and less the purview of the lower middle class, which were traditional and also spoke Ladino and not French and stayed in the Juderia and the Jewish quarter and didn't leave the Jewish ghetto. To summarize, Jewish feminism in Izmir was expressed in a few fields. The first, it was not national feminism as was conventional in the surrounding non-Jewish society or other kind of feminism, except cultural feminism. That is, women's entrance to schools and later the work as teachers, at least in the years in which my presentation deals with. The Jewish women of Izmir took an active part in charity organizations, but not, as far as we know, in political organizations during those years. Second, feminism was expressed by freedom of speech in womanly topics or in the declarations praising women and their right to modern education, especially in newspapers. In this context, we have seen that men also cooperated and supported women's education, even if it was only to enable them to be better mothers and educators. The rabbinical establishment, as said, continued with the traditional approach according to which a woman's place is at home. Despite some similarities, as I mentioned, it seems that Jewish feminism was not an established, directed process as it was in the surrounding societies. The Jewish women of Izmir did not mean to start a revolution against Jewish perceptions. Jewish feminism adopted more than one idea of progress and called for equal modern education for women, but ended at the same point from which it started. More radical voices which called for equality were few and solitary, and it's hard to say if they were compatible with the mentality of the varied parts of the Jewish population. It's hard to say also that feministic ideas got to various strata in the Jewish population, and even if they did, it is obvious they did not integrate well among the lower middle class, the same class that was mostly traditional. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. A lot of material, so little time, but you did very well. Now I invite you perhaps to sit here, and I will collect 3 questions each time, and then I will give you the word. So, okay. Can you please introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Debbie Weissman, and my question is really directed at all 3. And I'm certainly not denying the importance of vocational training and literacy and all these very important, empowering subjects. But I'm wondering, in the schools that you're discussing, was there any specifically Jewish education for the girls, whether it be language or text or prayers or anything that would try to strengthen their Jewish identity and practice, as there was later, for example, in Bet Yaakov in Poland?
Hi, my name is Saba Sumach from UCLA. I want to thank you all for your presentation, Joy, and Rachel. I specifically used you and your books over a decade ago in my own PhD dissertation. I wanted to ask you about the influence of Ort. Ort.
Oh, yes.
So, you know, I know within my own work looking at Iranian women, so I'm looking at the Shia world as opposed to the Sunni world, Ort became a very important aspect in teaching women, especially my mom and everything from the 50s on. That's where they got their vocational training. So if you could maybe talk about Ort and its influence outside of the Alliance schools. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sharon Corrin. My question's for Rachel. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about. Hello? Okay. Hello, I'm Sharon Corin, and my question is for Rachel. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the practice of lighting a candle for Shabtai Tzvi, and why that would have been remained of interest to the women in the community.
Could you repeat the last question?
It's about Shabtai Tzvi and the minhag to lit the candles. Yes. So who wants to start?
Okay, thank you. The first question was about, can you hear me? Was about Jewish education in the Alliance schools. I think we both mentioned, all three of us mentioned that Jewish studies were definitely part of the curriculum for boys and girls. The girls had less formal academic training than the boys, but they were all required to have some Hebrew language, and this was difficult for the principal because in the early days of the school, there was no one qualified to teach Hebrew in the modern method. So at first they brought in an interpreter or a translator from the French army who actually knew some Hebrew. And then they also they tried using the rabbis, but that didn't work. And in the end, it was the Jewish women themselves, the teachers, who taught Hebrew because they had their own training from going to the teachers' training school in Paris. So they had to rely on themselves to teach Hebrew. They also had Tanakh. They had some basic studies and prayers, and they learned, to follow the prayer service. Okay, that was the first issue. The second issue was about the Ort schools. Okay, I actually taught in the Ort school across the street here, but Ort really was brought to Morocco, and there was still an Ort school functioning. I was there in Morocco in '75. There was an Ort school still functioning then, and it might still be functioning now. I don't have any information on Ort in Tunisia. Obviously, they've done wonderful work worldwide, and if anyone knows more about the situation in Tunisia, please share it with us. So that's my feeling about Ort. I mean, they obviously do rehabilitation and training, and they're very successful at it. Okay, next.
Could somebody explain what Ort is?
The Organization for Rehabilitation and Training.
It's Jewish.
It's like a vocational school, so you go there to learn, and that's how to be a secretary. So it's huge in allowing women to then get jobs later on.
And they had school for
So this
Yeah, it started off in Russia, then they moved on to Israel, Bahrain, and the rest of the country.
And Italy.
In Italy, yes.
Okay, I'm not familiar with any Jewish school for girls in Izmir, before the Alliance. I know there was an attempt to open a Jewish school by Abraham Kamundo in Istanbul, but it failed. So we don't have any equivalent attempt in Izmir, not even an attempt, no.
Is it working or not?
Yeah, it's
Okay. About the Jewish educational part, it was different in both Italian and the Alliance schools. Much of it was done by local rabbis because the instructors were not that expert. Some of them, especially in the Italian school, one of the teachers, Mordechai Cohen, whom I'll mention later on as well, who was originally, the family was originally from Italy, and he was much more better educated, and both in languages, and also his interests were very wide. He was also sometimes a peddler, so he read a lot, wrote in periodicals in Europe, and also wrote a very important book, which is published both in Hebrew and some of it was translated into English. He gave Mordechai. And he taught Hebrew in the Italian school in a modern way, so that for the students to understand it. Regarding the vocational training, there was no old school in Libya, and the intentions of both in the Italian and the Alliance schools were different. In the Italian school, it was more kind of recreational for the girls, to do some embroidery because the students were more from the upper class. In the Alliance schools, it was more in order to attract girls or the families send girls to school so that they can learn a profession and work later on. Regarding the Shabtai Tzvi issue, this is mentioned in the book of Higid Mordechai. He doesn't explain so much the motives and so on. He just describes it, and he says that they both prayed to the candle and then lit it and had a song and to it mentioning both Shabtai Tzvi and his disciple Natan, and the Rebbe who tried to break the candle and also changed the words of the song for don't remember exactly something. Leviathan and so on, to take the names off. The women didn't always listen to it, maybe when the rabbis didn't overhear what they were saying. But Mordechai Kohen doesn't explain the motives or other issues related to it.
So we have, and also, I don't know who is first, because you raised the hands. Again? No, there was another one. Okay. So let's do here first. And then there, and then we'll try to be short. And yes, short questions. So, and so we have 6 questions. Okay. Please.
Francis Molino. I just had a quick comment for Efrat. It seemed like you were saying that when the girls and boys were trained in Paris for to become teachers in the Alliance schools, their education was different. And you said how many hours they learned French, and it was less so for the girls. Actually, I think that what you were referring to may have been more the curriculum in the primary schools themselves that were established by the Alliance, but the actual normal school training for girls and boys in France was the same, and the exams that they took were universal for non-Jewish potential teachers as well. So I think that might be a clarification, and in fact the Hebrew that the girls studied in the normal schools in Paris, according to some of the rabbis who were training them, they excelled even better than the boys. So their schooling in Paris was, if not the same, even sometimes superior. The exams were the same for both girls and boys.
Thank you.
Jonathan Sarna. When we look at studies of Jewish education, really everywhere in the modern period, there are 2 models. One model, which all 3 of you looked at and accepted, is a kind of heroic model whereby Western Jewish organizations, the Alliance and so on, come in and bring modernity to these benighted Jews. The other model is a challenge and response model, which argues that actually it was Christian missionaries who founded schools in all 3 of these places that happened, that other kinds of non-Jewish educational activities were going on, and that the Jewish education is really a response to that challenge, emulating some of what the non-Jews are doing, tempting away, in our case, Jewish women, but doing it within a Jewish context. So what I'm asking, all 3 of you, it seemed to me, accepted the first model. Is the second challenge and response model wrong? Are Jewish historians reluctant to give credit to Christian missionaries? What about the challenge and response model, and how do you feel about that model as opposed to the one you selected?
Margalit Shiloh.
by the way, in Jerusalem, if I may comment to you, it was definitely first the challenge, and then, okay.
By the way, also when we
Okay. I have two questions. First to Rachel Simon. Were these songs that you talked about, were they written? Did any... Okay. Okay, were they written afterwards? Did anyone compare them to Jewish women's Yemenite songs? Because from what you described, there are many similarities between these songs and the Yemenite. And to you, please, what is the date that women could be lawyers in Tunisia? In Palestine, the British did not allow women to become lawyers until 1930 because of the Muslim population.
Thank you. Yes, let's say that I give them the answer, then I do the last tour. So please.
Zoved? Okay, regarding the, first of all, the modernity missionary issue, regarding Libya, there were no kind of wide missionary activities the way, or there were, this is the way it works or not?
Put it to you.
The work now?
Yes.
Okay. Not much missionary activities the way it was in Palestine or some Turkey or other places. In the late 19th century, there was mentioned that some Jewish girls went to a school run by missionary women, but there was a small number, and it doesn't seem to have influence on the Jewish education. And as I've mentioned regarding the Italian education, the community, some community members, those mainly who had commercial interest with connections with Italy, wanted to develop it, and so they asked for it, and then teachers were sent from Italy, and something similar with the AIU School. Regarding the women's songs, as I mentioned, the songs, they not only they couldn't read, obviously they couldn't write as well, so it was all of it was oral. I know that some of the songs were collected here in Jerusalem, and some people work on it mainly in the musical part of it. Some of the songs are published in some of the books about the Jews of Libya, like the book Yahadut Lub or some other songs, but I don't know of any comparative work that was done between women's poetry regarding various countries in the Middle East and Islamic world, and obviously it's a very challenging thing to do, especially I don't know to what extent there are still women who remember these songs, so it's really important, and you are teaching, so you can encourage your students to do it.
Okay, I agree with Rachel. I think it describes the Izmir community as well. I think that it's also a question of numbers. The numbers of students that were taught in the missionary schools was lower than the ones that received education in the Alliance schools. And I don't think, again, like Rachel, I don't think they were influential. And don't forget that most of the community was traditional, and sending the girls to missionary schools was kind of not acceptable. And I dare to say that the usage of the term feminism, which I didn't use, the writers of the Incremental used, I think that this term wouldn't be perceived in the Jewish community without the Alliance schools.
Yes, about the missionary schools. Obviously, missionary schools were an issue. Parents did not want to send their children there, but before the Alliance schools were established, they did send them to these Christian schools, and sometimes the children ended up converting to Christianity, and they were lost. But once the Alliance schools were established, the Jewish population tended to use the Jewish schools, so it wasn't that much of an issue. It was mostly an issue before the establishment of AIU, the AIU educational system. Then there was a question about the model of heroic model or response and challenge model. Certainly the heroic model was what the Alliance would like you to believe was its function, to regenerate the peoples of the East with all the paternalizing and patronizing tones. But I think that underneath it all, they did feel that they were responding to the environment of the galut, shall we say, and their purpose was also to fight against anti-Semitism indirectly, or to fight against Christian influences, in other words, non-Jewish influences in the community. I think that because they also wanted the teachers to form an outreach program to the Jewish community. They would have lectures for them. The principals would go around every Shabbat and give presents to the Jewish women who had just given birth. So they engaged in charitable activities to educate the local Jewish community as well, and to prevent intrusions from other religious groups. So the Alliance was aware of the different challenges that faced them. Now, there was another question about what date were women allowed to be lawyers in Tunisia. It's not that simple. The Alliance focused on education and gaining credentials. So a student could go abroad after high school and become a lawyer. The question was the society to which they returned. Could a lawyer, a female lawyer, and Jewish, actually gain a clientele in a situation that was so male-dominated? Even today, there are people who say, "Gee, I think I really need a male lawyer. I don't think she's strong enough." Like in a divorce, people say, "Oh, I need a male. I can't have a female." Well, it's all the more so then that what happened with Juliet was she had all the credentials, but she did her stagiaire, her practice with her uncle, in her uncle's office. And then when she was married, she helped out in her husband's office in the afternoons. But in fact, she never could garner a clientele. And who was she talking to? She'd be talking to other men. They didn't want to deal with her. And women were not free enough to go to a female lawyer and say, "I want a divorce from this guy." So it just was the society itself that prevented her from actually earning a living as a lawyer. And in the end, she married, had children, and her husband's family prevailed on her to stay at home. So she lost that opportunity, in essence, to become a lawyer, or to practice as a lawyer. So it's not a question of when they could become a lawyer, but when could they actually practice, and when did society allow them to do this? And it was true in France also, that there was a woman, a non-Jewish woman, who gained her law degree in the early 1920s, and she too was unable to gain a practice and to gain clients. So we have to look at the other question, the other side of the issue. Not the date, but look at the society. When did that change? When did it allow women to work as professionals in the public sphere? And that's the issue for this period. Thank you.
Now, I'm going into the coffee. So the time of the coffee, but I think it's very important. We have still 15 minutes? No. But I think it's very important. So please, very short questions and very short answers. Yeah?
Okay. Hi, my question is to Efrat. Two brief questions. You associate the feminist ideas with the elite of Izmir, and in Egypt it was quite the opposite. The elite was the more conservative force, and the bourgeoisie was the vanguard. So if you could comment on that. And the second thing is that you present things in Izmir as if they were unique or maybe extreme, and it wasn't. I'm under the impression that it wasn't the case. It wasn't the case.
comparison to what?
In comparison to Egypt, in comparison to Lebanon, and to the Nahadine, to Syria, in comparison to both the Jewish society and to the Ottoman Empire in general.
Okay, it's a case study. You know, it's a case study.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Weiner, and I had a question also for Efrat. It's just a quick one, but I loved the information about the theater and actresses. I was just wondering if the career of Sarah Bernhardt was known to these people, if they cared about it, if it mattered at all. Sarah Bernhardt, yeah. To
Okay, so short answers. It's so interesting. I know. So please, I think I give it to you now.
As for Egypt, I'm not familiar with the Egyptian Jewish community to have this comparison conducted. I really don't know. I can only think of the differences, maybe Egypt history in the Ottoman aspect, like what happened with Muhammad Ali and so on. I really don't know what to tell you. As for not being special, I said it's a case study, and I just want to show how the communities within the Ottoman empires integrated into the Turkish and modern or modernized society in the 19th century. As for Sarah Bernhardt, I really don't know. I can tell you that they were highly influenced by novels and plays translated from French. I haven't come across any reference to specific actress or something like that, but novels definitely they were highly influenced by the French, especially the French, but also British literature and playwriting. So
it's very cruel to put an end to this really interesting session. I apologize for the question we didn't hear, but now we have time for coffee, and we are going to be back at 11:30. Thank you very much.